Welcome, thank you for joining me. We are live on Instagram, we are live on YouTube. It is Monday night at 9 p.m. and I'm going to try to do this every Monday at 9 if I can, if the schedule allows. This has been a really fun way of connecting with you guys and chatting about stuff. You know what's really interesting is YouTube has me in the right way, and then my phone is actually switching it backwards. So I'm seeing on YouTube and Instagram opposite. Yep. That's very, very trippy. Okay, so tonight's topic is rolling. That's a thing that comes up all the time. People asking questions about it. It's one of my favorite things to work with people on their rolling. This is obviously kayak rolling. And there's a lot of common mistakes that happen often, and they are very, very common culprits that will usually not allow people to get their rolls, or not allow them to have the roll be as easy as it should be. Hola, che, ¿qué tal? Gracias por estar conmigo. So I thought we could discuss a couple of the things that make rolling hard. And don't get me wrong, it is a really hard thing to do. We're asking our bodies to do something that is very unnatural. We're saying, nope, stay upside down. You don't need air. You be trapped in this vessel. No problem. But if you do a couple of things in a row, and most of them have to happen at the same time, all of a sudden you're right side up. It's hard to get right away, but with lots of practice it comes, and then the more you do it, you incorporate it, it becomes muscle memory, and then you're rolling without even knowing how you're doing it. So it's very interesting to then teach and pass that on to other people, because I think once I became an instructor, rolling started becoming easier, because in order for me to try to explain what was happening to other people, it made me a better roller, and at the same time realizing that every person needed to do something slightly different made me tackle rolling in a slightly different way. So, as always, if you're joining me on YouTube, there's a chat room below. If you just scroll down on the page, please feel free to reach out, because that way we can chat in real time. Same thing if you're watching on Instagram. Rolling is not hard. Learning to roll is hard. See, exactly, Peter. That is exactly I completely agree with you. Once you incorporate rolling into your body, once it clicks, and there's always a moment of clicking. I think that's why I really enjoy teaching to roll, because for people rolling, there's always a moment where lights are shining down and they go, oh, I got it. Especially after that first roll. Sometimes people come up on the first roll and they're like, what? How did that just happen? But there's a moment in which your body just clicks and you get it, and all of a sudden you can then get there every time. I think it's similar to riding a bike for the first time. It seems odd, but somehow the body just figures it out, and all of a sudden it just happens every time. So Peter's completely right. Learning to roll is hard. Rolling is very easy. The other thing that I've also found, that a lot of times it could be 90% mental, meaning the blocking of you getting that roll could be just in your head. It's a tough thing to do. You're trapped in a kayak, you're upside down, you want to catch your breath, you think it's minutes, hours, when it's really just a couple of seconds that you're capsized. But in your head, you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this, I have this big kayak on top of me. Once you get that confidence and you get out of your head that it's a hard thing to do, and your body just does it on its own, all of a sudden it becomes easier and easier and easier. Another thing that I found makes it easier is having more than one roll. If you work hard on your main roll and you have that down, all of a sudden you can start learning other things. And because you're focusing on other harder things, Roberto, saludos de Perú, gracias por estar conmigo. If you learn to do other rolls, all of a sudden you don't pay attention to that first one. That first one is your backup roll. And then you get better and better at that one because you're not worried about it anymore. That's your safety roll. That's your comfortable roll. You go to that one every time. And the more, and the other hard rolls you do, other stuff gets easier and easier. So, if you're joining me on YouTube, as always, there's a text box below. You can type in questions. We can chat real time. If you're joining me here on Instagram, thank you for joining me. Type in questions, comments, whatever. So tonight, I thought we could go through a couple of things that I've seen. One day I learned. How's it going? So nice to see you. I was just actually watching one of your videos. Trip, how did you like the new stand-up paddling board? I saw that you went fishing with it. Let's see, Valeria. It's so true. Yes, thank you. I hope you do think that what I was just saying was true, because I have seen it so many times where, I mean, it's not like I've been teaching rolling for a long time. I haven't. It's just been a couple of years. But in the cases that I have seen, I've worked with people that had been trying for a long time. Love it. It's a kaku kahuna. So let me ask you this: does it feel stable when you're fishing from it? Because I know some of them are very stable. They're wide, but it just seemed like you had so much gear on your stand-up paddleboard. By the way, sailing and such, Trip, please check out his channel. It's excellent when it comes to anything kayak camping, kayak fishing. He's out on adventures all the time. Fantastic channel to watch. I'll put a link below on the YouTube feed later. But yes, more typical fishing, more than really. So you thought that the stand-up board was more stable than a typical fishing kayak? That's kind of crazy. All right, so let's get back to rolling. Same thing in YouTube. If you have any questions about rolling or anything that we want to talk about, there is a chat room down below. I'm not a kind of roll. I'm just silly. Hey, I can be silly too. All right, let's leave it at that. But anyway, so I haven't taught that many people, but the people I have taught, most of them, there's always been a moment where something clicks, and all of a sudden you see there's a big change. In the beginning, they're worried, they're scared, whatever, and then all of a sudden they're throwing themselves over, they're capsizing quickly. They know they're on their way to getting it, and all of a sudden when they get it, or at least the first or second time that they come up, and it's somewhat effortless. They get one where, oh, I didn't fight my way up. I just rolled up. When that happens, our job is then to kind of coach along, but that's when you get to then think about all the little things. You start to notice things and why one roll is easier than the other. So what I mean is, for example, this last weekend, it was actually with Sea Kayak Connecticut. It was the last, sorry, I'm not going to be there next week. This is the last month that they're having their pool sessions, and so for me, this was the last pool session. But there was a moment where at first it was like juggling. There was a lot of things going on, and then one of the students all of a sudden, what they were doing is they were instead of sweeping in a nice arc to do a layback roll, they were actually pulling straight down, and the blade, instead of doing anything to give them lift, it was just going right down. So they were struggling to do that, but then when they would do a sweep, all of a sudden they would come right up, and then they realize, oh, okay, this can be easy, this is doable, and all of a sudden I didn't have to say that anymore. I didn't have to remind them to keep doing that. They would pull on the paddle, it wouldn't go anywhere, and all of a sudden instead they would go in an arc, and up they came. There was such a wonderful moment in which they got it. And whether they could do it or not, that just takes practice. But the fact that they were able to tell that one way was hard and one way was easy, that's it. That moment of clarity, they got there. So moving forward, they It was just a matter of just practicing. And obviously working with someone that could give them feedback on the spot to make the roll better. But at that point, even if all they did is they just practiced on their own and then taped themselves doing it, they were on their way. Buenti, hola, ¿cuántos tipos de rolls sabes hacer? Y es el más difícil el que haces sin pala. Ok, sé varios, ok, de los que conozco, sé de adelante para atrás, el layback, de atrás para adelante, reverse sweep, de adelante a adelante, o sea, ese que hago es el storm roll, pero ese todavía estoy trabajándolo, hago varias cosas mal y tengo que mejorarlo ese. Y después de los layback hay muchos distintos, hay muchos de cada uno, porque se puede hacer con la pala, con mitad de pala, la pala acá el hombro, detrás de la cabeza. Esos todavía solamente sé hacer muchos de los layback porque para mí fue el más fácil, pero de los layback puedo hacer los básicos, o sea, con la pala butterfly, que es con la pala en una mano, shotgun, que es con la pala así en el hombro, en el sobaco, perdón, y después con el Norsack, y con la mano me sale de vez en cuando, todavía me cuesta, y lo que más me cuesta son los hombros y flexibilidad. En eso estoy trabajando. Pero estoy muy cerca con la mano, pero de los otros, los básicos solamente con la pala. Gracias por estar conmigo, Wendy. There were a couple of questions. Hold on. I want to catch up. People think that rolling is an advanced technique. We should teach it from the start. Sometimes they get it straight off. Wooden boathouse. I couldn't agree more. So, my wife and I started paddling with recreational kayaks. And when we moved where we live in Westchester, we were going to be near the Long Island Sound, which can actually turn out to be pretty rough in conditions. If there's a lot of wind, if it picks up, it could actually be quite rough. So you cannot go out into the Sound with recreational kayaks unless you're in a very, very secure location. The kind of you should go on the Sound with a sea kayak. So we bought our sea kayaks over the winter because in the winter the prices were going to be lower. And while we were doing that, we decided to take some classes. And the first class we took was a rolling class with Sea Kayak Connecticut and David McPherson. And so before we ever made it out to the water, we had learned to roll. And I have to say that I wish we had taken classes earlier than we had, because learning to roll made us better paddlers because we weren't so worried about being capsized. And even if you don't get the roll, just working towards it makes you be comfortable upside down, makes you be comfortable capsized. It's not the end of the world if you're upside down. You can find out, you can learn how to get back in, and if not with rolling, through other methods. There's lots of different types of recoveries and rescues by yourself, with others, and it's really good to practice all of those. So I completely agree with Wooden Boathouse saying that rolling is not an advanced technique. I knew how to roll before I had a decent forward stroke, which is kind of crazy because we should focus on having a better forward stroke. But I actually wound up taking forward stroke lessons much later, and then looking back through all my footage, I realized just how bad my forward stroke was, but I knew how to roll. So I felt more confident being out of the water, and then I took lessons to become a better paddler. Okay, dashboard. I can visualize what to do underwater, but it's unnerving. I agree completely. I think a lot of times it's 90% in your head. For example, with the Norsack roll and then the hand roll, for me, my biggest obstacle is in the hand roll, I have nothing in my hand. So in my head, I keep thinking, oh man, how am I going to get up there? How am I going to get up there? Even though I know that if I trust my body mechanics and if I do it correctly, I should get out of the water. But because I'm not holding on to something that makes me think, this is more leverage, then I have a harder time with with my hand roll. My Norsac roll, I'd say I'm at about 98% success rate. On good days, I get all of them. When I put the Norsac away, it doesn't happen every time, and I really think a lot of it is in my head, just thinking, oh no, I don't have something in my hand. And then the other thing is flexibility, my shoulders, twisting, and then really slowing down my roll. Those are the things I need to work on. Valeria, ¿sos argentino? Sí, soy argentino, crecí hasta, pasé mi infancia en Argentina y con mis papás vinimos a los Estados Unidos cuando tenía 12 años. Así que hace bastante. Un montón. Gracias por compartir tanto conocimiento con nosotros. Por supuesto, si tienes otras preguntas, por favor, para eso estoy haciendo estas sesiones, porque me encanta hablar así de uno a uno. So if you're just joining me, thank you for joining me. I'm going to be trying to do this every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, depending on timing. Hopefully it'll happen. It's been awesome. The response, people have been asking questions all the time, so this gives me a chance to actually interact and talk, which has been really, really fun. And it's a good time because the baby has gone to sleep, and so I can just come down to the basement, hang out for a little while, and just rant. Okay, so the idea tonight was to talk about some of the culprits that sometimes are a pain in people not getting their rolls. The main one that I see all the time is lifting of the head. So if you have attempted to roll and you've watched any of the videos out there, Justine's video with Sherry and Turner, as well as there's just so many, and they all say the same thing: keep your water in the water up. Sorry, keep your head in the water until the very end. Head out of the water last. So the idea there is when you're sitting in your kayak, right? Your head is the heaviest thing, and it's at the furthest location from the axis on which the kayak pivots when you're rolling. So imagine having a bowling ball all the way out in your hand. If you lift that out of the water first, there's no way you're going to be able to roll up. Same thing happens with your head. Our body tells us, here we go. All right, Kayak Life, thank you for joining me. Please jump in and please, with any tips or anything that comes up during a conversation, I'd be more than happy to listen to any feedback you have. So, head out of the water. Our body is constantly telling us when we're capsized, we need to take a breath. We need to get our head out of the water and get a breath. The problem with doing that is, one, especially if you're doing a layback roll or any of the rolls where you're coiled up, by doing that and getting your head out of the water, you're actually engaging the leg that gets the kayak to fall and continue to be capsized on top of you. So there's just no way you can get out if the kayak stays on top of you while you're struggling to get a breath. However, if you either use your hips and pivot in the opposite direction, or you're doing a layback and the same thing, you arch your back and leave your head in the water, then you allow the kayak to flatten out, and then eventually you get your head out of the water at the very last second. So your head being heavy in the water up until the last moment, and then it comes out of the water. The other thing to think about is, think about ice skaters. When they're going for those spins, I have no idea what they're called, but when they're going for those spins, when they get their arms out, they'll spin very slowly. When they bring their arms in to their bodies, they start spinning very quickly. That's physics. That's how it goes. So, in a lot of these rolls, having your head as close to the kayak, either on the front deck or on the back deck, or in the water, will help you turn that kayak. If you're sitting straight up, which happens all the time, when you sit straight up, it's very hard for you to get yourself out of the water. And that's when a lot of times people try to muscle their way out into a roll, out through a roll, and that's when they get hurt, especially shoulders. Think about it. Your shoulders are not strong enough to just lift your entire body out of the water while you're catching your breath. You need to rely on the rest of your body, your flexibility, your spine, your core. You use so much of your body in a roll. Don't just use your shoulders. Don't just use pure strength. Unless you're doing a C2C. In a C2C roll, you do use a lot of strength. However, in a good C2C, you're using your entire body. Your entire body creates a C when you're pointing on one direction, and then you end up coiled up in the opposite direction. So it's your entire body, not just your arms, not just your shoulders, your entire body. But head coming out of the water, when I'm helping people roll and I'm standing by their stern, the easiest thing to see is if I see the kayak start to turn and I see their head poking out of the water, I know they're not coming up. However, if I see the kayak turn and then the head comes up, I can let go of their kayak and they're probably going to be coming up every time. It's a couple of questions. Has anybody tried to add ballast to the bottom center of the boat to help you learn to roll? You know, I haven't. Especially, I mean, William, would you be taping that ballast to the bottom of the kayak? Because otherwise it would just roll around. I'm guessing you're thinking you put something at the bottom of the kayak and then you just get it to stay there. I know that does work where we've done some things where someone will be in a kayak, someone else goes and grabs onto the bow of the kayak, and then they try rolling. And yes, having that weight on the bottom will help them come up. Usually, I just think it's better to have a buddy spotting you and standing in the water next to you. That way they can easily turn the kayak or help you. And it's really good to get feedback on the spot. I think that's crucial because, for example, one of the reasons it took me so long to learn some of the Greenland rolls is I didn't have anybody at the pool sessions to help me. So what I would do is I would set up my cameras, I would film myself, I would struggle, and then I would go home, watch my videos, talk to other people online, compare, and then go back to the pool the next week and then just try to do better. When you have someone, when I was down at Delmarva, in one single day, 4 different people told me different things, and all of those things, all of that instruction helped me get to my Norsac roll in one day. And I struggled with my reverse sweep for over a year. Having someone that can spot you and tell you, no, do that, oh, you picked up your head again, you picked up your head. You don't think you're doing something, you are. If you have someone telling you what to do, then you can start to correct it and then incorporate it rather than just pick up bad habits. So that's why I always urge, if you want to learn to roll, either do it with a friend that really knows what they're doing and can help you, or go and take some classes because you're going to succeed so much faster than if you just try to struggle on your own. I did that with a lot of the rolls that I learned, and then when I went to learn from other people, I learned them so much quicker just by having people telling me, you're doing this wrong, do this instead. Use float bags. Yes, float bags are very useful. I have some. I will go get them. So there's lots of different nifty float bags that can be used. These are some of the ones that we use. You can slip this paddle float. You slip your paddle into it. You blow it up. And all of a sudden, your paddle will just remain afloat. And you can pull on it. And it'll give you really good buoyancy so that you can practice the rolls. You could either have one on each side of the paddle, or you could just have one on one end and work with that. If you look at any of my earlier videos when I'm just learning, all of my rolls I learned first with paddle floats and then I moved on. Sometimes you don't even use the paddle, you just use the paddle float itself just to work on the hip motion or what your hands are doing, but that's super useful. Let's see, there's a lot of JG Studios, like your videos. Thank you, I really appreciate it. I've used the paddle float to learn the body mechanics and position. Any other tips to teach others? Insider, tell me what tips you're thinking of. What are you trying to help others with? Uh, float bags to hold ballast. Oh, so you mean you can put weight on them and then add float bags to fill out the boat. Weight will stay. This is how I pack my boat at sea. Example, day hatch full of thermos, etc. And on top, I add a float bag and fill it up. Kayak life. That is a really great tip. I never thought of that, and it makes a lot of sense. So you just use a float bag to keep things packed down so that you could have that ballast. That is a fantastic tip. Thank you for sharing that. I also have a couple of float bags that are really big and long from my skin on frame. I'll bet that would be fantastic for doing the same thing. High voltage, you made it. How's it going? Thank you for joining me. Okay, there was a question about any other tips. Some tips that I like telling people, which sometimes they come to pool sessions, they come to lessons, and they think they want to learn without goggles, without nose clips, because that's how you're going to do it in the real world. Oh wait, there's been a lot of questions on Instagram, and it wasn't even saying anything. Sorry, I completely missed that. How many kilometers do you paddle an ordinary camping day trip? Let's see. In a camping day trip, well, I think it depends. Usually, I'll tell you in miles, and then we can do the conversion later. An average day that I feel comfortable paddling is between 15 and 20 miles. I know lots of people that paddle a lot more. I just don't paddle often enough to feel comfortable paddling even more. Some of my buddies, they can paddle between 20 and 30, but they paddle a lot more often than I do. I also don't have a very fast kayak. I use a Greenland paddle. I like my own pace, so for me it's not about the miles. I just usually take my camera, take my time, go slow, and have fun. Gracias. Gracias, Sebastián. Gracias por mirar el video del drone. Head of the water idea is so good. I get the opposite thing with the hip flip. So this is a light bulb moment. Muy bueno. Can you talk about rolling a fully loaded boat with a week's worth of gear? Absolutely. So Jesse Play Outside is talking about rolling a fully loaded boat, which actually Kayak Life had a great tip that we just talked about keeping all of the gear and the heavy stuff towards the bottom, and then putting a paddle float to pack it down, and that way you're using it as an opposite ballast. The top of the kayak, when you capsize, it's going to want to go to the bottom. But one of the ways to practice a fully loaded kayak is pop your skirt and then practice rolling with a cockpit full of water. You just need to slow down your roll, think about technique, make sure that you have a climbing angle on your paddle. Slow it down and you will come up. I feel like rolling a fully loaded kayak is very similar to just having tons and tons of water in your kayak. So that's an easy way to practice it. It's also really good to practice the re-entry and roll. So have your kayak capsize, be next to the kayak, and then take a deep breath, get inside, roll back up. Or, even better, get inside, put your skirt on while you're capsized, then roll up. So that means you're rolling with tons of water in your kayak. That's really good practice. Kayak Life. Do you have any other tips for practicing rolling with a fully loaded kayak? And then, if you really want to, do practice with tons of stuff in your kayak. The only problem is if you don't trust your hatches being completely dry, that's a little bit of a gamble to try rolling if you have lots of equipment in there. So I'd say just have yourself in there that it's okay if it gets wet. But definitely a cockpit full of water is helpful in that feeling of just having tons of mass that you need to move around and see what it's like, that momentum that you need to build by having a nice, slow, steady roll. There's been a couple of other messages. Let's see. I secured a 15 pounds ballast at the bottom of the boat behind the seat, and it greatly assisted my instructor helping me learn to sweep and knee actions to the kayak rolling inertia success. Love your video. Thank you, JC Carpenter. See, that's a great idea. I usually don't work with ballast. What I usually do is I stand behind on the stern so I can watch all of the motion, and it's very, very easy to spot the hips, and it's very easy to spot the head poking up. And what I also like seeing is from the back, I can very easily see the trail of water off of the person's head. If the paddler's trail of water looks like they're doing a shampoo commercial, it means they're coming up like a rag doll, and it's a really nice fluid motion. If you see the head poking up, nope. But so what I like doing too is I'll just usually help by holding onto the kayak and the deck lines. I like trying to take away some of that extra oomph while they're just getting that idea down, or I usually hold them right behind their backs, especially when they're doing laybacks, so that they're working on twisting their shoulders and keeping them flat on the water. When I do those, I'm trying to just make sure they're not struggling, because when you struggle, you wind up getting tired more quickly, and I'd rather you have more energy for a longer period of time and get more correct rolls in. It's more about learning the technique than struggling your way up. I'd rather make it easy and put learning wheels on just at first, and then when they don't notice, you stop holding them all together, and then they come up and they think, how much of that was you? And you say, I was standing on the other side. Congratulations, you just rolled. You actually, I'm answering the questions before I type. Good! All right, that's great to hear. Head coming up is the wrong knee is pulling, and pulling with both knees. One way to fix this issue is to have the paddler flatten one knee or take off the footrest. Yes, so it is counterintuitive, but what happens is when you go up, this is your head. My fingers are your head. The kayak is capsized on top of you. When you poke your head up, you're actually scrunching up the opposite knee, which collapses the kayak on top of you, as Kayak Life just said. So, you are actually supposed to engage the opposite knee, the one that's going to be turning the kayak all the way around. If you engage both knees, nothing happens. If you engage one knee and then not worry about the other leg, and sometimes just disengage it altogether, then that's when the boat is able to turn. If you put pressure on both sides, nothing's going to happen. So, one easy way to see that is if they're poking at their head, they're using the wrong leg. Okay, there was another question over here. Hello, sir. Hello. ¿Te resulta más cómodo hacer el rol con una Greenland paddle o una pala euro tradicional? Julián, a mí me resulta más fácil hacerlo con la pala de Groenlandia. La primera vez que hice un rol con la pala de Groenlandia pensé que se me había trabado la punta en la punta de la piscina. De repente estaba arriba y no lo podía creer. Lo que me gusta de la pala de Groenlandia es que por la forma que tiene es muy fácil agarrarla y extenderla. Entonces si uno está acá y quiere hacer el roll, ahora tenemos la pala extendida muy fácilmente. Y es la otra cosa que es que me gusta mucho es al tenerla agarrada de esta manera y tener la mano en la pala, se da cuenta uno en el momento para dónde está apuntando. Entonces con una pala europea puede que esté torcida o esté en una dirección incorrecta en donde se te va a meter más abajo del agua. Con la pala de Groenlandia a mí me resulta que se orienta sola y uno sabe exactamente dónde está. Entonces a mí me resulta más fácil. Conozco personas que les resulta más fácil con la europea. La cosa es que en la europea uno tiene mucha más fuerza, entonces si uno está acostumbrado a depender de la pala, la europea le ayuda a tener un buen jalón cuando está tratando de salir del agua. A mí me gusta más la de Groenlandia, pero uno no tiene que acostumbrarse a una sola cosa, hay que tratar con distintas. Lo que me gusta hacer es aprendo con Groenlandia y después practico con la europea también. Okay. Any tips to learn not going into forward stroke and pulling straight down? Lots of practice to build a motor pattern. Oh, Morgan, thank you for joining me. Yes, tips to learn to not go into a forward stroke and pulling straight down. As Kayak Life said before, well, actually, no, he was talking about paddle floats for something completely different. But it sent me on a tangent about paddle floats. I like using paddle floats when I see that people are pulling on the blade too much. We are used to this. We are used to pull-ups. We're used to doing that motion. We do it thousands and thousands of times every time we're on the water. However, if you're doing a layback roll, you're going to want to do a sweep, which is completely a different thing, especially if you're not looking at your blade. So, using a paddle float at the end of your paddle is going to stop you completely from making that blade dive and from pulling. So, this happens all the time. If I put a really well-inflated paddle float, they'll struggle here and then realize, wait, nothing's happening. Oh, there we go, and up they come. So, doing that many times until they realize every time they pull, they're going nowhere, but if they sweep, they're coming up, I think is very helpful, and then you deflate, 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 and then eventually take out the paddle float altogether, and hopefully then you think about, instead of pulling straight down that nothing's going to happen, you need to sweep out. The other thing to think about is if you're in setup position and all you're doing is pulling, so you're curled up on your kayak and all you're doing is pulling, nothing's going to happen. You need to get to the point where your paddle is perpendicular to the kayak so you have the most amount of leverage, either for a C2C or for a sweep. The sweep, you're going to sweep, and then as you go through the entire arc, that's when you're going to get all that leverage. Don't get me wrong. If you do the body mechanics correctly on any of those rolls as you improve, you're not going to need that paddle anymore. But as you're learning and you're using the paddle for that, then yes, I think maybe use a paddle float at first. Get used to not making the paddle dive. Well, diving is a different thing, but just not pulling on it, sweeping, or if you're doing just a C2C, then it's not about pulling straight down. It's more about everything else that's happening with your body, and the paddle should just kind of stay in place. Think about, you know how in a forward stroke, in a good forward stroke, when you plant your paddle in the water, you're not pulling water towards you. The paddle should stay in place and you're pulling the kayak forward, and then the paddle is just staying. If you pull too hard, you get bubbles, you're just wasting energy. Same thing happens in the roll. The paddle should try to stay in one single place, and then you're moving your body around that stationary paddle on the water. Greenland paddles make a huge difference. Wooden Boathouse is saying. Greenland paddles make a huge difference in rolling. I only teach rolling with the Greenland paddle now, then adapt to Euroblade. I wish I could say the same, but a lot of times people come and they say, I want to learn with what I use every day. And so then I say, we will learn with whatever you'd like. I do like, if I see that they're struggling with the Euroblade, then I'll switch to the Greenland paddle just to do a little bit extra training because I think they are a little easier to learn with, and then move them back to what they use every day. There's nothing wrong with trying to learn on something that's a little easier. Rolling is hard to learn, but once you have it, you can then adapt to anything. You can roll in a lot of different kayaks. They might be hard to roll in the beginning, but once you know what you're doing, if you learn on a low volume kayak, you can then apply what you were doing in a higher volume kayak and adjust. So more hip, more body motion, a little more leverage on your paddle, whatever it is. Show what it looks like upside down. What direction are you going, and what knee are you using? A visual. I don't know if I can draw that. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll link. There's a couple of websites I can point you to that have really great drawings of what's happening. But let me think. How can I do this? No, this is not going to work. The way I think about it is, if you're doing a layback, whatever the main commanding hand is working, that same side leg is going to be the one that's engaged. So even though I might be, okay, so you're looking at me here. So this is going to be my right side roll. So my right hand, right arm is out in front, even though my paddle's on the left side, I still consider this my right hand roll, because this is my leading hand. My leading hand is out here. It's the one that's leading the blade. This is, there we go. So, my right hand roll. So for this one, if I'm going to be leading with my right hand, it's my right knee and my right leg that's going to be doing all the work. The left has to just not be a part of the equation at all. If I'm doing on the left side, same thing. If my left hand is leading, this is once again for a layback roll. If my left hand is leading, even though I'm on my right side, if my left hand is leading that blade over here, then it's going to be that left foot, that left leg, that left knee that's going to be doing the work. And the reason I say leg, foot, knee is because I've realized as I teach and help others that everyone thinks about it differently. Some people say they want your knee to come up. Some people say they want you to think of just the knee, the whole leg being engaged. I sometimes find that some people respond better to thinking about the foot leading. So what I mean by that is, if I'm going to do my right hand roll, so I'm on my left side, but it's going to be my right hand. It's almost as if I'm stepping on the gas with the right foot. So my knee gets engaged because I'm thinking of my foot. My entire leg gets engaged, and then I come up. So whatever gets you thinking about engaging the correct leg for the correct side. One tip, learning with whitewater kayaks makes it easier to roll as you switch to sea kayaks. I agree, but not completely. I found that in some whitewater kayaks, while it is easier to roll, as an instructor, it has been a little bit harder for me to help in the process because there's less for me to grab, there's less going on, there's sometimes spinning. And I found that with a sea kayak, it's a little bit slower of a process, and it's a little easier for me to talk through and get them to understand it. However, as it clicks, I agree 100% that the rolling I've done in a whitewater kayak is almost instantaneous. The moment you realize how to flip those hips, the kayak turns and up you come. So they are very, very easy to roll, and that's done on purpose. Hold on, because there's a couple of messages that I'm missing on YouTube. I'm trying to keep up with both, and a lot of stuff is going on. How do you properly size a Greenland paddle? Nick, I will add maybe a link below. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. Sometimes I believe it's wingspan plus the size of the tip of your finger to your elbow. Don't quote me. I will post links below exactly. Then there's other ways that you're supposed to be standing and then reach up with your hand, and your finger should curl over the top. But there's very specific ways of how you're supposed to do it. Don't quote me on it, but I'll post some links. There's definitely a lot of other knowledgeable people that I'd rather they explain exactly how you should measure that. Greenland paddle sizing depends on the paddler and intent. Oh, okay. Kayak Life is answering that. Most folks pull to feel the resistance. What we want to do is shed resistance by rolling hands toward you during the roll. This would shed the resistance and keep the slicing blade. Yes, Kayak Life is completely right. The idea, what I was saying before, of just pulling versus sweeping and getting that lift from the sweeping blade. If we don't shed resistance, we will start to go towards the bottom. Think an airplane wing flying to the surface. Also, common to punch with an onboard hand. Think of gripping $1 million in bent arm. This way we don't punch during the roll, and hand stays near the body and the core. Depends on the whitewater boat. Yeah, I completely agree with the whitewater boat, but you make a very, very good point. So what Kayak Life is talking about, so actually, let's just say this. So in my head, I had made, there's a couple of comments, I'll get to them in a second, but I just don't want to get sidetracked. I made today, when I was thinking about this, a list of a couple of common mistakes. So the first one, head poking out, is always a pain in the butt. Another one that is always a pain is a diving angle of the blade. A blade that dives on you, because you're either not noticing that it's going straight down, you're not getting that feel of lift. One of the culprits, which is very easy to correct, is the trailing hand. So not the hand that's doing the sweeping, but the other hand. Kayak Life called it punching, and that's completely right. Very often, when people go through the roll, this other hand goes way out here, and guess what happens? Look, if I just hold this hand here, look what happens if I... You can't really see it on Instagram. If I punch out with my opposite hand, it makes the tip of that blade dive. You don't want to do that. You want to end up, the way I like to show it is, you want to end up with being completely flat and almost as if you're doing a chin-up. Some people like doing it out here, some not too much, because you don't want to also hurt or get your shoulder exposed. But I think of it as a chin-up, and then this back hand needs to allow for the blade to not dive. If you punch out, blade dives. If you keep it nice and tight over here, then all of a sudden you're flat on the water. So that's a very good point. The second point I wanted to mention, and this I wanted to mention, there was a question before, on little things that you can help people with. One is goggles and nose clips. I know that when we roll in the real world, you want to roll without nose clips and without goggles. But when you're learning, once again, there's nothing wrong with making it a little easier for yourself. So when you're rolling, I really, really like having people with goggles, eyes open, so that they can look at the blade. Because with a Greenland paddle, it's a little harder for the blade to dive. It shouldn't dive at all. But with an Euro blade, it's very easy. If you don't have the right angle, it'll dive on you. Instead, if you have a little bit of a climbing angle, it will, no matter what, if you sweep correctly, it'll get you out of the water. It has to. If you have the right climbing angle, it'll always look for reaching the surface. Same thing with an airplane. If the wing is pointing in the right direction, it has to go up. So, if you have goggles on and you're looking at the blade, you will come up. Sorry, if you have your goggles on and you're looking at the blade, it doesn't mean you will come up. But if you have your goggles on and you're looking at the blade, there's a very good chance you can correct the angle of your paddle and then come up. Okay, let's see. I know that there were a couple over here. Thanks. So if I create bubbles with the paddle, I am wasting energy. Yes, absolutely. If you are creating bubbles with your paddle, it means you're pulling too hard. Whether it's on any kind of stroke, there should be no bubbles. The idea is the paddle goes in, it stays in place, and everything else happens around it. Forward stroke, sweep stroke, anything. The idea is only use the amount of power to get resistance against the paddle, and that's it. Otherwise, it's just wasted energy. How can I get more consistent with blade angle when I'm sweeping the paddle on my layback? Goggles. Keeping your eyes on the paddle the entire time. That to me is the easiest way to do it. One. And then another tip that I was going to mention is taping yourself. Wait, I'm going to hold on for a second. If you're joining me on YouTube, thank you for joining me, first of all. There is a chat box down below, and you could type in, and we can chat live right now. So, goggles, I think, are a huge part of realizing what you're doing with that blade. But what I also like about telling people to watch the blade, which I cheat all the time, but then I catch myself and I try doing it again. If you watch the blade, you're also doing something that we talked about in the very beginning. So if I don't watch the blade, I might do something incorrectly. If I watch the blade as it goes all the way around, I'm leaning my head back. That's going to mean that when I come out of the water, my head's going to come out of the water last. Not only am I looking at the blade, but then that's going to help me. All right. You can use a sticker at your fingertips to index angle. Oh, I've never done that. Interesting. Peter just said. Do you have any recommendations as to where to go for kayaking technique lessons in South Florida? I do not. But if you go to the ACA, AmericanCanoe.org, American Canoe Association website, they will have a list of instructors and clubs that teach close to you. They just have a big database of every instructor in the U.S., and that way you can see and find a club that'll you can definitely find lessons. Oh, and there you go. That's what I've also said. Check out local kayak clubs for education. Same thing. If you look at any of the kayaking clubs, they will almost always have instructors, and if they have instructors, they almost always have lessons at some point. So that's always very useful. Let me see if I missed anything. I don't think I have. I think those are all the comments so far. Okay, so I think that's been a very good lesson. Sorry, not lesson. Q&A. I just want to have one more point before we end tonight. And as always, thank you for joining me. I'm going to try to do this every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time if I can, because they're turning out to be really fun sessions. Not only do I help other people, but then other people help me as well, as in Kayak Life here, which is absolutely fantastic. I already took 2 tips away with me tonight that I'm going to be trying, and it's superb. I absolutely love that whole cascade effect of people helping each other along the way, no matter what level we're at, because really one of the things I learned with paddling is that there's always more to learn, and there's just so much you don't know. De nada, you're welcome. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to mention that has worked for me and really works for people that I talk to, and that is videotaping yourself. And you don't need a fancy camera. You could just have one of your buddies grab a cell phone or anything else. Most cameras nowadays can do video. Have someone else, or just take your phone, put it up against a rock in your local pond, whatever you're doing, or at the pool. Film yourself and then watch the clips after, because this happens to me all the time. I think I'm doing a good job. I think, oh yeah, I'm engaging this, or I'm not poking up my head. There was one time that I was trying to do Norsac rolls, and actually I used a clip in one of my videos when I say finally success, when I got my Norsac roll after I came back from Delmarva, where I thought I was keeping my head back, and then looking at the video, not only was I getting my head out of the water first, but I was trying to sit up. So not only was I not getting the Norsac roll, but I wouldn't have gotten a regular roll that I know how to do just fine. But because I videotaped myself, I was able to assess that and think, I'm just being an idiot. I need to go back to basics. What am I doing wrong? Head. Shoulders are not flat on the water. I'm not going in an arc. I'm speeding through it. Whatever it is that's holding you back, if you videotape yourself, the camera doesn't lie, and it's very easy to then assess what you're doing wrong and then try to do a better job. And then what I'm also thinking of doing is, so I did this with Tim Galloway, which was very, very helpful for me when I was learning some of the other Greenland rolls. I would videotape myself, and then I would send him the clip, and I would say, this is what I think I'm doing wrong. What do you think? And he would give me a couple of tips as well. And now I've done that for a lot of people. They send me clips of them rolling, or forward stroke, or other things. They'll just send me a quick clip and show me something and just ask me, what do you think of this or that? And then just with a couple of quick tips. I know that Chris is not going to be able to join us tonight, but he recently sent me a clip of him doing some sculling and why it wasn't working. And on video, it was very, very obvious to see what was happening. He was just not keeping his shoulders flat. His blade angle was fighting him a bit, and he was sinking. And so in just a couple of sentences, he tried again, and he actually sent me a clip today of a beautifully executed roll, which was fantastic. And I think sometimes that's helpful. Not only to videotape and assess yourself, but then maybe send it to someone else that knows how to pick out some of those things and make it better. But please, 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 if you can, work with other people. You can really get hurt when you're rolling. You can injure your shoulders. you really could get hurt if you really don't know what you're doing and you're just struggling through it. So having someone there to assist you, it is very helpful when you're learning. Eventually, you can practice all you want on your own. Still be careful, especially always, please, one thing: if you're rolling out in the out in the open, please check your depths. Take your paddle, check that it's deep enough for you to try a roll. The last thing you want is to capsize and then hit your head on something. So please check how deep the spot you are is. Awesome live stream. Thank you for the info. Absolutely, Nick, anytime. Video is the way to go. Post and share. We can give feedback. Suction cup to front. Yes, Kayak Life is completely right. A suction cup and an action camera on your kayak is very useful. That's usually what I do. He said the front, I agree, but I also will say the back is also very helpful because to me, when I see it from the back, it's very easy to see shoulders and head movement, and that's helpful too. Alf, thank you for joining me from Norway. Great talk. Thanks from Norway. Wow, it's late for you. Thank you for joining me. All right, let's see. I think I had one more point I wanted to make, and now I can't remember. Diving angle. Oh, okay. The last culprit that I see a lot. Sorry, no, two culprits. I'll make them really very short. Two culprits. One, timing. So we were saying a lot about engaging your leg. Timing. A lot of times you'll see people try to come up, and they're doing all of the body work, and the kayak doesn't even move. That's because they haven't engaged their leg, and they didn't start that engagement when they need to. You need to move the kayak first, and then you come up. So meaning, as you start whatever motion it is, whatever type of roll you're doing, get that kayak moving, because you want to use the momentum of the kayak to get yourself out of the water as well. It's not just you struggling to get out of the water. Turn that kayak, and then come up. And then the last one I wanted to mention, which is my biggest obstacle, because flexibility is the key, and sadly, I've been really bad. For my New Year's resolution, I said I was going to try to stretch all the time. I started really strong, and then I got busy. I'm up editing videos late, and I haven't been stretching anywhere as much as I should be. But one of the reasons that sometimes your rolls fail is keeping those shoulders flat on the water. It sounds silly, it's easier said than done, but think about it this way, especially on a layback roll. The dead man's float. If you know how to swim and you've ever done a dead man float, by laying on your back, you can essentially float on the surface of the water. The moment you turn sideways, you sink. Same thing happens with your shoulders, and that goes for forward finishing rolls or layback rolls where you do depend on that buoyancy. So either if you're going to go on your chest, both shoulders flat on the water. If you're going to go on your back, both shoulders flat on the water. That's very hard to do because that means you need to twist almost 90 degrees, or sometimes people get their butts out of the kayak a little bit to just get as flat on the water as possible. In order to get a good balance brace, same thing. Both shoulders need to be completely flat on the water. So that's one of the things that holds me back, and I can see it. I can look in my videos. My hand will dive when I'm doing that because I am not twisting enough. I need to work on my flexibility. Instagram is telling me that I have 2 minutes left. We've actually gone an entire hour. Thank you for being with me. There's a whole bunch of you still there. I really appreciate it. On YouTube, I know that there's a couple of extra comments. Let's see. That's a great point in video in the back. Cheers, I will try it. Turning the kayak first uses a sweeping blade, and once you get to 90 degrees, we start the full hip snap after extension. Don't drop your forward shoulder until paddle is 90 degrees. That's a great way to put it, and I completely agree. I really like the idea of turning the kayak first when I love looking when people are practicing their rolls. You should see a kayak turning, and then a person pops up, and that's how you should think about it too. I think turn that kayak, even though you're motioning the entire time. It almost looks like the kayak is your lower body, and then there comes the person. And it's very obvious to see when people do it on their whitewater boats. Whitewater boats, the boat just flips and then brings the person up with them when they do a good roll. Excelente los consejos, gracias. Dwayne, nicely done. Thank you, gracias. Thank you so much for being with me. 30 seconds remaining on Instagram. I'm gonna cut it off. Paul Trip, lots of solid info, good stuff. Cheers. Thank you so much for being with me. I'll see you guys. Next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We can chat about something else. If you have a topic that you want to discuss, please reach out and let me know. I'd love to hear what else you guys want to talk about. The last one that was on camping equipment, that came from someone else. This one came from someone else. Drive with both legs during the roll. So many people forget not only to pull with the rolling knee, but need to push with the other opposite foot. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I usually think of, well, I think, great job, Lube. You rock. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for the tips. I really appreciate the help. It's always wonderful to not only pass it on, but to learn as you're doing it, because that's one of the things I really absolutely love, is showing up to kayaking events and just realizing how much you can learn by just, like, don't talk, shut up, listen to people, and it's incredible how much you'll pick up. Like I said, when I went to Delmarva, 4 different people told me 4 different things for the same role, and all 4 of them combined are what got me there in a day. And I was then able to pick and choose what worked for me. So everyone's body's different. Some rolls will be better for you than others. Some paddles will be easier than others. Some kayaks will be easier to roll for some people than others. Let's say you're a big, powerful person, then doing a C2C on a whitewater kayak will be nothing for you. But then if you're a very flexible, lanky person, then doing a beautiful Greenland roll instead, that's the way to go. There's pros and cons to each roll, and then each one of us will probably excel and do terribly at others. Thank you for joining me as always. Any other topics, please reach out. Any other questions, please reach out. Thank you again, and I'll see you next Monday at 9 p.m.